Mermay, the time of the year where I get to outlive some of my childhood dreams by drawing people with fishtails while also getting to practice some anatomy and design characters as mermaids or merman. I've drawn Genshin Impact characters for Mermay in 2022 and 2023, and this year for 2024 I'm going to do this as well, and alongside I'll share some anatomy advice. Over the past year I've learned a lot about anatomy, and I thought this video would be a fitting opportunity to share what I learned with you. Let's start with the first character I drew. This would be a character I haven't drawn before since back in 2023. He wasn't released yet. It's Ryothusley. First I'll tell you a bit about the drawing process for him. I went with a pose where he would have his left arm lifted up and the right one more straight downwards. Actually with this arm I was a bit unsure about the pose for it and the hand, mostly because it was overlapping with many outfit parts, then determining how stretched forward the body should be was also a bit difficult. For the mermaid tail I went with a longer one compared to the ones I drew last year with it and the outfit or design I drew in for him. I wanted to create a lot of flow in the overall composition of the image. For his outfit design I then was inspired by his overall character design and added some zigzaggy parts, especially the bandage-like parts around his arms and tail would be included here. For the colors I then went with mostly black and red. I also tried including some blue as well, but decided to not go with this. Instead I wanted to add more color contrast by including the blue in the background. For shading the anatomy I then made my sketch layer of the upper body visible again to determine the edges of the chest, arm and other muscles. Since Ryothusley's upper body looked a bit too long at first, I made his tail start higher up. Shading wise I at first pretty much just used this front on neutral light. Later on I then added some light from the right and a few cool shadows on the left. It's not very intense, but I wanted to add a bit of variation to the shading this way. In the end I also added a pattern on Ryothusley's mermaid tail and adjusted the background. That's it for the process of drawing him. Next I'll talk a bit about how you can draw better anatomy. For this you could just search tutorials, get an anatomy book or use references, and the way you learn best varies for each person, so I would recommend exploring some options. Here are the steps I myself would take to learn anatomy from the start. I would begin with getting the general perspective and proportions of the body parts correctly. Only learning this already takes some time, so if you are new to drawing characters, I would do this one step at a time, maybe starting with the torso, then the arms, then the legs, the hands and the feet, and finally how you combine all the parts, how they move and connect. And here you'd also include the head as well. When you have a better grasp of how to do this, you can then move on to looking more into the anatomy and muscles. Here I would recommend not overwhelming yourself with learning all the muscle names and drawing every muscle. Instead I would start with bigger muscle groups you may already know, like the pecs, the biceps and triceps and so on. Looking up a lot of references can help you to learn more about how you want to portray muscles, how many of them you want to draw and so on. For this I would again do this one body part at a time, and with this aspect you could either do this while focusing on lines and shapes first and afterwards, repeating the whole process for shading, or doing both the lines as well as the shading at the same time. That would be it for the steps. After I introduce you to the next illustration I drew, I'll continue with some more anatomy advice. And next up would be Genshin's merman himself, Neuvillette. Here drawing the pose and upper body was a lot easier. I went with him having his right arm stretched out while his left one was bent in front of his upper body. Adding Neuvillette's long hair was really fun. I also included a small braid here. When it came to coloring, I went with a few various tones of blue and white. I really like how his design contrasts with Ryothusley's for the colors as well as the shapes and patterns. For Neuvillette we have more rounded flowy shapes here. I also included gold accessoires, while for Ryothusley his accessoires were silver. The accessoires were contrasting to the design colors here, in that way being warm for the cool colors and cold for the warm colors. Inspired by Neuvillette's Genshin character design, I included many bows and ruffles for his merman design. Shading-wise, other than the regular shading, I also went with for Ryothusley. I added more light from the left here. And here I'll tell you a bit more about all techniques I have used to learn more about anatomy. First we have gesture or pose drawings where you're constructing bodies. In general, this would also include studying from real-life references. You can focus on different aspects such as the proportions, the colors or the lighting here. Next I mentioned Mark Brunette's Learn Anatomy in 7 Days challenge. I repeated this for different body parts, the torso, arms, legs, hands, feet and the glutes. Using the process he introduces in his video about the challenge was really helpful for identifying your current struggles and focusing on one body part at a time, which I can really recommend. You can also repeat this challenge wherever you want, no matter what level you're at, since while in art you'll find you can always improve with something. Maybe you've already learned a lot about how the muscles for a body part look when drawing it, but you're still struggling with the shading, or you keep making one part too big or small. The challenge helps with aspects like this. After talking more about one specific video, I now mention watching anatomy tutorial videos in general. I would recommend Cynics, Mark Brunette and Proco as resources here. You can draw along with the person making the tutorial while also taking notes and so on. Like this, I for example went through the muscle names and I would learn them by repeating them for many days in a row, similar to what I did with my school notes. I also talked more about my general art study methods in these past videos. If you're interested in how I developed art study wise, feel free to check them out as well. Finally, I would mention artist studies. Here I would first make sure you have some basic understanding of the body part you are studying. Based on studying real-life references and proportions like this, you are able to recognize how other artists stylize body parts before you just try to draw like them without understanding why what they draw looks good and how it works. It's good to focus on artworks and artists where the anatomy is clearly visible and you like how the anatomy looks. And it's of course good to pay attention to that the artist you are studying from has knowledge about anatomy as well. All in all, it's good to figure out your favorite way to study by trying out multiple techniques. After some time, you might also want to switch the things you're doing here up. For the final illustration in this video, I'm drawing Ryothesly and Nuvillet together. I wanted Ryothesly to hold on to Nuvillet's hips while he has his arms wrapped around Ryothesly's neck. Since I don't draw ship illustrations like this one here that often, and because I just enjoy doing this, I added a lot of variations for how the characters could have their arms wrapped around each other. Nuvillet's body is also bent at the hips, and here I was a bit unsure about if this would be possible, so I filmed myself twisting my spine as well to see if it's possible to have your upper body be turned to the side while the lower body is facing a more frontal direction. Figuring out a nice flow for the pose and elements like the outfits and the hair took a bit of time as well. Since the characters are underwater and floating, it's possible to draw this in many ways after all. After I had filled in the flat colors, it was time for shading. First I added some shading for the skin to define anatomy. For this I made my body sketch layer visible to see where the different parts would be. This would also be the part where I referenced a lot of images. Then I moved on to the hair. As I was shading these parts first, I didn't have a particular lighting scenario in mind, but after some time I just added a bit of light from above, so it would fall on Nuvillet and Ryothesly's faces and shoulders. Like this I wanted to draw some attention to the faces. I also wanted the overlapping parts, such as Nuvillet's torso in front of Ryothesly's, to not have two similar values. With some of the shadow colors, especially for the skin, I was unsure whether to make these more reddish blue or even purple, as a mix of both. Shading skin with blue usually makes it look too lifeless to me unless it fits the lighting scenario or is only added as reflected light. Since the characters here would be underwater, this would make sense though. Overall I went with cool shadows even for the skin. Still, the skin does have slightly warmer shading than the rest of the characters' bodies. Next I blocked in a background which was basically a blue gradient with some light strokes from above. And I decided I didn't like how the hip area for Nuvillet looked, so I painted over this. At first I thought about having his lower body be more turned towards Ryothesly a bit, then I decided to still go with the turned lower body, but making it less extreme. I also didn't like how his hand turned out. It didn't look like him holding onto Nuvillet's hips. Here I struggled a bit with finding a nice pose, so I instead moved on to finish the rest of the illustration before adding in this hand. I adjusted a lot of the colors, making them more vibrant and adding a few colorful parts. Other than this, I also went into Clip Studio Paint to add in some more effects and background elements. While I do prefer using Krita to draw, I really like the asset library in Clip Studio Paint, and adding elements from there can be a lot faster than painting everything in myself. Then I also blurred a lot of parts, leaving the faces and bodies with the most focus. After inserting an overlay layer with yellow colors around the faces to make them stand out even more, I added in Ryothesly's hand, and like this the illustration was finished. And in the following part I'll tell you more about my own development and how I've drawn anatomy over time. For this, let's also look at my older Mermay drawings and compare them to my newer ones. Some changes I made are stylistic, choosing a different way to portray the anatomy. Here there is no right or wrong, and you can experiment with this as well. Other changes are based on learning more about anatomy and drawing it. This would be more focused on the proportions, and I would recommend focusing on this at first. While you don't have to use super realistic proportions, it's good to make sure that, for example, the arms are around the same length or that the spine isn't bent too much, unless you want to create a very unnatural looking character. Alright, so for 2022, you can see I drew very thin proportions. While you can stylize this, to me it just looks unappealing and unrealistic now. The bodies also look very flat to me now. I drew very small bodies and big heads. Then I also portrayed most of the anatomy with lines which would be more of a stylistic choice. In 2023, some of my proportions improved. To me the torso and arms still are quite thin, making the characters look younger and cuter than what I would prefer right now. Some of the proportions and the muscles look off to me. Still, more muscles are portrayed clearly through shading, which is nice. Some some of the anatomy is still portrayed using lines here. Finally, for 2024, you can see the body sizes compared to the heads for the two characters I drew increased. The characters appear older this way, while the anatomy isn't perfect to me, it looks a lot better than for 2023. I also discovered I prefer to only portray the anatomy with shading and using few lines. In this video, I gave you some general anatomy advice. If you would find a step-by-step demonstration of how I draw anatomy very helpful, you can also let me know in the comments. I went with more of a theoretical explanation of how you can study anatomy in this video, because like this, you can apply the advice I mentioned in your own way. Other than this, you can also let me know what you would prefer to see more of in my future videos, time-lapses or fully screen-recorded processes. I also mentioned in the beginning of the video with some text that I've shown you parts of the full screen recorded process of drawing the Mermay illustrations in this video, including the whole process sped up, would have been pretty much unwatchable since it would include a lot of mirroring and moving around in the footage. Still, I wanted to show the illustration process this way instead of with a time-lapse, because like this you can get more of an idea of how I structure my documents, or you can see me working zoomed in as well. And if you are interested in seeing the longer full screen recorded process, you can also find that on my Patreon. I'm not uploading a 6 or 8 hour video, which would be not speeding up the video at all on there currently. I just speed the footage up so it's still understandable what I do, but also not too long. You'll also find the time lapses and the full PNG versions of these illustrations on there. And that's it for this video. Whose design do you like more, Ray of the Sneeze or Nouvelettes? You can also leave your thoughts about how they would interact as Merman, or who of the two characters you in general like more. If you have any suggestions and ideas for next year's Mermay, you can also let me know in the comments. I hope seeing the drawing process, hearing me talk about it, as well as talking about some anatomy advice was inspiring and helpful to you. Have a nice day. Bye!